So, hey guys, and what we're gonna do today is essentially read the pasta of the month because I'm really wondering if this wiki has sorted out that issue where they just put in whatever garbage they can regardless of the quality, because that seems to be a major issue with this site. They just put whatever shit they want in the pasta of the month section. And a lot of them are the mods stories. So to me, that just screams that it's the mods only are allowed because, yeah, it just seems that way. Anyway, this one is called Poppies and Daffodils for some reason. Who fucking knows why? I don't know, man. This creepypastas are just getting worse and worse over the time it goes on, and like they used to be genuinely pretty good because they seem like they could happen, and nowadays it's always some kind of monster and overly long bullshit when the entire point of a creepypasta is supposed to be something that might happen and trying to convince you it did. But whatever. I guess people don't care about that anymore. Howard clutched the newspaper between his wrinkled fingers, squinting at a small section on the opinion page. Oh boy, oh, who reads newspapers these days, excuse me? Plantoids, the dark side of phenomena. April 14th, 1981. Exactly 1 year ago today, the tiny town of Trovigo, just off the coast of Italy, wakes up to an incredible sight. Beside the forgotten church in the center of town, the Eichel graveyard has sprouted an enormous mass of native fauna. The fauna isn't the right word, because fauna is for animal life, flora is for plant life. Proofread, you fucking retards. The official measurements coming in at about 4 stories tall and 50 meters wide. What the fuck? Those who were there first to witness the growth wasted no time in calling it a gift from God even before the international presses rolled in, and the entire town was sold off for government investigation. Of course, because Italy is full of religious idiots. I hate religion. Well, I hate organized religion at least. It's just a power grab. The coach driver swerved over a particularly troublesome pothole, the impact jostling the paper from Harold's grasp. It landed on the seat next to him with a small poof of dust, adding to the already stale air, making him feel like he needed to sneeze. The driver flashed an apologetic look, Harold meeting with a strained smile, for scooping the paper back up into his hands. Within days, the world's best and brightest scientists were pouring in. All they had in their minds, they all had their minds on the same conundrum. How could such a large growth of healthy, thriving plant life spring up seemingly overnight? Yeah, they used fauna. That's for animals, not plants. Flora would be the correct term. Proofread your fucking stories, you retards. Oh my god. Early analysis of the soil surrounding the growth is inconclusive. It seemed to hold no special qualities compared to the samples of nearby unaffected soil. But of course, the answer didn't take too long to emerge. Yet rather than bring a logical explanation, it only served to raise more confusion. Okay, that's typical with these with pastas. They always start out like this. He flicked his thumb across his tongue and turned the pit. Ew. Yeah, this dude's old. He knew they had to be close. The road was getting more and more uneven, the engine wheezing with each turn and the sweat in the brow of the driver growing ever more apparent. Slowly, slowly, he, what? Silently, oh my god, silently, he turned and scanned his eyes over the empty seats. The end of the line had been quite some time ago. The roots of the mass weren't coming from the soil, the article continued. They were coming from the coffins? The roots were infused with the very bones in the graveyard of skeletons. Excuse me? Reading the papers? The driver spoke with a slight country drawl, his words tinged with nervous energy. My own article, got it published a few days ago. Though I'd appreciate if you kept it on your focus on the road. Yeah, no shit. shot his stern glare into the rearview mirror, smoothing the paper out across his lap. Right, sorry, gotta focus. Took less than a week for similar instances of all different sizes to start popping up all over the world. Age and condition mattered not, as the scientists quickly discovered. For as long as they were real bones from a real dead human, they were sprouting flora, not fauna. Oh my god. It seemed like ordinary life was put on a standstill as people raced to discover these plantoids, as they were promptly named. Even now it remains a prominent topic of interest. So, a year since that fateful day in Italy, what do we know? Well, no official explanation has been released. As far as the average person knows, the residents of Trevigo were spot on with their first assumption. Cleanup crews have been mobilized across the globe to take care of the most inconvenient growths, while newly found organizations work for the preservation of others. What the fuck kind of bullshit is that? Are you kidding me? These things just sprout out from dead people and you're gonna let them stay? Are you fucking retards? There's even been a nature-based religious movement swept up from the ew. Of course there would be. It's called a cult. It's not a religious movement. It's a cult. With numbers growing by the day, experts are estimating there may still be millions of plantoids left to discover, and millions more working deep underground. Slowly but surely, people are adjusting to the sight of a towering stack of flowers in their neighborhood. But deep down, there's a few unsettling concepts that have been tugging at the back of our minds since this entire time. Whatever the nature of this event may be, with the spectacle of it seems to have distracted us from the real disturbing questions we need to ask ourselves. Why are plantoids popping up in locations never before inhabited by humans? That's that's a good point. Why are some becoming seemingly privatized, hushed away from public view? Why have some been found in the Antarctic, as certain rumors claim? It seems whether the cause of these it seems that it seems that over the cause of these phenomena, the powers that be are reluctant to answer these questions. I implore you, readers, next time you see a plantoid, stop and think about who could be underneath, and how they met such a fate. Here, the coach came into a stop. Howard tossed the bag aside and eased himself into a standing position with the help of his cane. Yeah, he's an old guy. His ceramic hip clicking quietly with each step. Eesh. He walked to the driver's booth where an itchy, red-headed teen was awaiting his payment. I can't take you back, remember? He spoke, his fingers tapping on the steering wheel. There was an awkward air to the boy's mannerisms, like he was never able to keep quite still. It was risk enough getting you out here in the first place and not waiting around for you to do whatever you want to do. I know, Howard said, taking a wad of cash from his back pocket. That was what we agreed on. The boy took the cash into his pocket, glancing at the grubby windows for any sign of trouble. The vast expanse of nature around them remained completely empty, save for a few foxes and birds. There wasn't another soul in sight. Thanks for keeping your side of the deal. I really need this money. Hey, you used to live here, right? Can you tell me why they had to close this place down before you go? Just out of curiosity. There have been all sorts of rumors flying about for decades now. I don't know what to believe. Accident at the nearby Raiden mine. What? Howard explained. Too much radiation. The long-term exposure would have been fatal. Everyone had to go. You can't mine Raiden. The fuck? You can't mine that. What the fuck? But not everyone went right. I paid you to drive, not ask questions. Sorry, the boy spoke, sinking in a little in his chair. He puffed a short sigh. I gotta get back home. Town I picked you up from is a good few miles away, and I'm running low on gas, so we don't have much to waste. See ya. Goodbye. Howard turned and stepped out into the dusty soil, the coach doors closing behind him. With a final nod, the driver revved the engine back to life and drove off down the country road. He sighed and gazed out across the town before him. After all these years, it felt good to be back. Well, already I have at least some intrigue about what the fuck is happening here. Don't go talking to creepy Fred was a well known saying among the locals of St. Anthony. It was one of the first things Howard noticed toward the beginning of his visit to the town, and it proved to be a sentiment that was difficult to forget. Fred Hazelton was St. Anthony's blemish, its imperfection. His presence was known universally amongst the town's occupants, but most seemed reluctant to even acknowledge him. It was as if a silent mutual agreement had been made to avoid the man at all costs. He didn't pretend he didn't exist, and for all Howard knew, he might as well not have, for he apparently spent almost all his time cooped up in a dilapidated mansion next to the local cemetery in the outskirts of town. Howard pondered this thought as he plunged a mouthful of juicy chicken past his lips. The dinner invitation he had received from the local mother and her husband had been tempting enough to accept. We hope you're enjoying the town so far, the mother spoke, smiling warmly as she tucked into a spoonful of rice. Absolutely, said Howard. It's so much nicer than the city. All that pollution and concrete numbness can get to you sometimes. Small, cozy places like that's not how you spell cozy. Say it like St. Anthony's fit me much better. Husband not in agreement. Plan on staying much longer? Only a few days at most. I'm waiting a call from this writing agency. They're considering my application. I'll be gone the day I hear back from them. Well, we wish you the best of luck. Hmm, okay. The thought of Fred remained embedded in Howard's mind as he conversed about such mundane matters. Fred Hazelton. Strange how it was, with some hesitant, so much as mentioned the man's name, and him still being the subject of countless rumors. What's up with that reclusive guy, Fred, I think his name was? He spoke, unable to keep the thought from occupying a space in his tongue. Instantly, the family's demeanors turned colder, as if simply speaking the man's name had invited some dark shadow upon the house. Neither the woman nor her husband wished to speak first, yet the latter took it upon himself to answer the question. Don't tell anyone we told you this, but Fred's a bit of an odd case, he whispered, leaning towards the table. There's reports of him in the cemetery almost every night. Out he shambles at some ungodly hour, creeping through the tall grass and the leafless trees. It's a little strange, to say the least. Reports? Howard queried. Why? Why is he going out so late? What's he doing out so late at night? His mom is buried there, the monk spoke, in the cemetery. She lived in the mansion right up until she passed away last year. Nice woman. Only slightly less of a shut in than Fred. But still, she used to bake little snowy cupcakes for us all at Christmas. Fred moved in a couple days after her funeral. Apparently, she left him everything in the will, the house, her money, her possessions, you name it. She came from a very wealthy family. She let out a slight sigh, allowing herself to drift away for a moment. It's a shame Fred never put any of that money into the mansion's upkeep. It used to be a very pretty building. Look, between you and us, we think he's a weirdo, the husband spoke. He stays in that dusty old hole all day and only comes out in the dead of night like a vampire. Looks like a vampire, too. He's probably still living off whatever supply that old hag stashed in the grove before she passed, wasted away. Honey, do you care? Do you think he cared what everyone says about him? About his reputation, I mean? Husband replied, smirking slightly. His knife scraped across the plate as he tore off another piece of meat from the bone. Of course not. Can't remember the last time he spoke to any one of us. Mikey at school says he spoke to Mr. Hazelton once. The couple's kid spoke up at last, playing with the greens in his plate. When we saw him sitting by the upstairs window, Mikey asked if Mikey asked Mr. Hazelton if he was a ghost. Did he say anything back? Emma inquired. Nah, he just looked at him all funny and went back inside the house. Creep, was muttered under his breath. Wow, you're a fucking judgmental piece of shit, aren't you? Fred's antics meant the cemetery was seldom visited by the locals, and yet, when Howard paid it a visit, it seemed well kept. The vegetation was clear, the tombstones were clean, and a fresh pile of flowers was sitting in Mrs. Hazelton grave, not in bouquet or vase or any sort of container, just scattered lightly across the soil, a mess of poppies and a scattering of daffodils. Howard was intrigued. The fact that Fred's behavior could very well have been of a grieving man wearing the death of his much loved mother, and nothing more, never seemed to occur to anybody. Either they didn't know or they didn't care. And it felt unfair to Howard that no one was even attempting to reach out to the man to establish any sort of connection. Yeah, no shit. It's fucking disgusting. Needless to say, it came as a huge shock when he received a dinner invitation from Fred early one morning, written in his very own handwriting. "Dear newcomer," it read in a tall, slanted font with exaggerated curves like that of a person attempting to write formally but not used to such a way of shaping their letters. "I have noted your arrival in town and would like to properly introduce myself. I understand you may have heard certain things about me from the other residents here, and as unflattering as they may be, I can assure you a good portion of these claims are entirely untrue. I would deem most satisfactory if you were to come to dinner tonight at my establishment at 6 p.m., where I am sure we can have a polite chat about said rumors in a sensible manner. Yours endearingly, Frederick Hazelton." Okay, so this is progressing in a intriguing way, to say the least, and definitely have some questions, and it's well written so far, minus the few mistakes that I've mentioned, but whatever. Howard was flabbergasted, to say the least. A few horrible thoughts came upon him being stalked and spied upon, but he soon reminded himself not to jump to conclusions. He was living relatively close to Fred. It was perfectly reasonable for him to have simply observed his visitation of the town just like anyone else. He couldn't form a definitive judgment of the man until he met him in person, and this was the perfect opportunity to do so. It seemed likely the locals would do nothing but discourage him if he dared tell them about the invitation, so he kept the information to himself. The hours passed by and no attempt at all, and quickly he found the sun dipping below the edge of the horizon. Slipping into some formal attire, he readied himself for the occasion, brushing his teeth and taking one last good look into the mirror before he ventured outside. He'd never been up close to the house before. It was now revealing itself to be an even greater state of disrepair than he'd initially reserved. It was somewhat isolated from the rest of the town, and obscured on all sides by its front, by a cluster of thick willow trees. The remnants of what had once been a well-kept building all but faded away. The windows were cracked and foggy. A film of dirt and grime covered the outer layer of glass, and a thick covering of ivy was creeping its way up the brickwork. Yeah, this is typical haunted house bullshit. A film of dirt and grime covered the outer layer of glass, and a thick coating of ivy was creeping its way up I already read that. A light scattering of collapsed roof tiles were displayed across the top of the building, like little specks of darkness sucking up the moonlight. The inside lights were on, and the great rusted knocker on the front door felt cold and rough in Howard's hand as he dropped it against the wood. Slow, irregular footsteps came down the hallway. Howard swallowed and put on a warm smile, forcing his hands away from retreating inside his trouser pockets. The door caught on the chain lock as it opened, and he heard soft breathing coming from inside. His footsteps came to an end. "This is the oldest building in St. Anthony's, you know." Fred's head had slipped into the gap so unnoticeably he hadn't seen him for a good few seconds. His face was shrouded by the night, eyes wide like a cat's as he stared from the crevice. His voice was delicate and precise as he spoke with the hint of an English accent. It cut through the cricket's chirps like a knife as Howard stood there nervously unsure how to respond. "It predates the town itself. It was built by my great-great-grandfather and the rest of St. Anthony. And the rest of St. Anthony was formed outward from it." The wind whistled along the street as a few more awkward seconds passed by. Howard took a step forward, ready to say something, but finding the words caught in his tongue. "So I do hope you will excuse its current condition. It is not that I do not care about the well-being of this house or its history. I am not a very handyman myself, and I would hire someone to come work on it for me. But I've been busy as of late, and I'm not exactly a very social person either, if you cannot tell already." "May I come in?" Howard finally forced out. Yes, please, make yourself at home. The chain came off the latch with a metallic click. He waited for Fred to pull the door open the rest of the way, but instead, he heard his footsteps leading back into the house. Grasping the knob, he pushed it fully open, and was mildly startled by its sudden slam behind his back as he entered the mansion. The first thing he noticed was the air. It held the instantly recognizable qualities of a fresh mist of breeze, almost overpoweringly so. He swallowed and wrinkled his nose, hoping that wherever Fred had disappeared to, he hadn't noticed it recoiling. I am afraid you must forgive me for the aroma. Howard heard his voice echo from one of the next rooms over. A nasty settlement of rats have recently invaded the mansion, and although I was capable of driving them off, their pungent odor remained. Better a mild breath of mild chemicals than a breath of rat droppings. Fred's voice had an edge of humor, even as Howard cringed at the thought. He sniffed a little harder and indeed could detect some other scent overshadowed by the smell of what he presumed to be some exotic flower. The food is all set out and ready to eat. Please, come join me in the dining room. The image of Fred hiding around the corner brandishing a meat cleaver popped into Howard's head, as well as one of him leaning over his plate with a devilish grin, sprinkling cyanide on his food. Again, he was forced to reassure himself it was going to be a perfectly normal night. They would eat, share a conversation, and he would leave. Nothing more, nothing less. Warily, he started walking down the hallway, the ragged puffed dust around his ankles with every step. Despite despite its extravagant and significantly faded exterior, the interior structure of the house seemed quite simple. There was a central hallway which led from the front door to the base of the stairs, and four doors along the way, two at each side. Three were shut and presumably locked, and one on the further right-hand side was slightly ajar, casting a crack of light against the opposite wall. Howard let his eyes wander from corner to corner of the hallway, observing the chipped yellowed surfaces of the wall and ceiling. It reminded him faintly of what a hoarder's house looks like when all the clutter is removed. Eesh, that's... With an outstretched arm, he pushed open the far right door. Fred stood upright at the side of a polished wooden table, hands behind his back, and a sort of half smile spread across his face. A singular light bulb hanging from the ceiling, illuminating the room and giving Howard his first proper look at the man he had heard so much about. He looked around somewhere in his mid-30s, a slither of blonde hair sitting atop his head, neatly combed above his ears. His face was narrow and elongated, and his eyes were full of caffeine, the dark bags beneath them being the most noticeable symptom of nocturnal habit. The black bow tie was wrapped somewhat shoddily around his collar, and the rest of his outfit gave off the impression of an early 1900s gentleman with a pinstripe jacket and a white dress shirt, along with the jet black suit pants. Howard took another deep breath. Still, the smell of Febreze lingered. Please, take a seat. Howard stepped to the table and dragged a cushioned chair out from underneath it, making himself comfortable. The floorboards were ragged and ever so slightly uneven, creaking as he shifted and leaned in towards his plate. Our dish tonight comes from Mother's old ration supplies. They were much more flavorful than the processed slop they sell at the local market, I assure you. I trust you will find them quite enjoyable. I certainly do. Again, that tiny hint of a smile pierced through Fred's expression. He sat and cleared his throat, scratching the bridge of his nose before taking a nap from his pocket, and laid it on his lap. Howard looked down at his food. Two veiny sausages nestled themselves beside a heap of mashed potatoes, drizzled with a brown, gravy-like substance. A small pile of various vegetables was scattered off to the side, soft and wet. Ah, boy, Julian, I'm sorry. Dispersing at the touch of his fork. Been enjoying town? Fred was already tucking in, slicing open the sausage meat and dragging it through the thin river of gravy before putting it to his lips. Suddenly it occurred to Howard he had barely said a word to the man, and he fumbled internally, trying to pluck a sentence out of the whirlwind of thoughts blowing through his brain. Yes, it's very quaint. I could see myself coming here one day when I'm old and retired. Fred stopped eating for a moment and looked at him with a kind of knowing air. You like traveling, yes? Howard raised an eyebrow, twirling a loose sausage strand around his fork. How'd you know? He said, popping the strand into his mouth. He jostled it back and forth with his tongue, trying to detect any unusual flavors, even as he kicked himself for being so presumptuous. People like you come and go occasionally. By now I'm used to seeing them. I see, I replied, swallowing his mouthful. It was spit-suckingly dry, but he pretended otherwise. Do you always invite them over for dinner? You're the first person to respond to my letters, he said almost sadly. Oh, well, Howard trailed off, mumbling something vaguely sympathetic. There was silence. There was silence for a while. He tried his fill with the mashed potatoes, unable to keep himself from stabbing at them until they were distributed across his plate like a damp layer of toilet paper. The tall, looming grandfather clock ticked rhythmically as they ate. Stood near the head of the table next to a blackened fireplace. Allow me to cut to the chase, if you please, Fred suddenly spoke, setting out his knife and fork, and bringing his hands together. Howard straightened up, finishing a particularly chewy string bean. I understand the other residents of this town may have been propagating some harmful information about me. Please, if you will, disclose some of the things they may have said. Do not hold back. Be as honest as possible. Fred stared, hands clasped together, body stiff and expectant, waiting for an answer. Howard rubbed his temples. He wondered how best to tell that the entire town wanted him gone. He thought it to be strange he was even asking such a question. Surely he would have picked up the local attitude by now. Um, a lot of people seem a little disturbed by about your nightly walk through the graveyard. Yes, I have gotten that impression, though I'm not sure why. I find myself to be the only person responsible for its upkeep. Did you see the graves this morning? The cleanliness of those headstones? Not to toot my own horn, but I'd say they were spotless. The graves, they looked like they were freshly dug, didn't they? Who do you think's responsible for that? Howard peered past Fred. I noticed the soil-coated shovel in the back corner of the room. A small pile of mud and grass blades sat beneath it. Anything else? Anything a little more specific? Fred continued. Anything, I hate to use the word, but incriminating? Oh, no, nothing like that, Howard continued, waving his hands in dispel the notion. The worst of it is, well, someone said you were like a vampire with the lack of appearance during the day. Good, good, Fred nodded, taking a sip of water from his glass. His shoulders relaxed, and Howard could see a weight lifted from them. Nothing out of the ordinary again. Then, he picked up his knife and fork and resumed eating, as did Howard. Once again, the unnatural silence crept in, letting his eyes wander across the room. He spied a cupboard of antique dining ware, displaying ornate plates and gleaming cutlery. I heard this used to be your mother's place at some point, he said, feeling he should at least attempt to keep the conversation going. She always wanted the plot of land for herself, Fred spoke in a jarringly monotone voice. Somewhere private and empty. I'm sorry? Fred stared at his plate. Howard froze, overcome by the terrifying feeling he'd said something wrong. For where she wanted to be buried, she kept telling me that when she was sick. A nice open field for her where she could watch the bees dance across the flowers in peace, across the poppies and the daffodils. Those were her favorites. She told me they reminded her of her childhood. He was deathly still. Howard chewed on the bottom of his lip, wringing his hands. I never made the arrangements. She did not tell anyone other than me. Did not put in her will, but it meant a lot to her. It really did. With a sniff, he flicked his eyes up and said, Where are you going to be buried? I've never really thought about it too much. I might be cremated, maybe. I couldn't say. Fred shrugged. To each their own, I suppose. Mother did not want it to be cremated. She always hated fire. Fire is what took father away. He said it with such nonchalance it took Howard a moment to process what he truly meant. Oh, I'm so. Mother used to say that was where father was now, where the fire is. I was never too sure myself. Father was a mean man, but he didn't like the fire either. Howard's face sunk as he noticed the family picture on the wall that hung crookedly, the glass layered with dust and the frame chipped and stained. From the dim lighting, he could make out two smiling faces and one far less cheerful looking man, arms crossed firmly at his chest as he glared into the camera. Well, what a lovely evening this has been. Fred scooped up his last forkful of mashed potatoes and swallowed it, his plate empty. Howard reached for his knife and fork, realizing he still had a few good bites to go before he was finished. No, no, please, Fred spoke, standing up and slipping the plate into his hands. You are full, you are full. I will not force you to eat more than you wish. He turned on his heel and walked to the kitchen door before Howard could say a word. Brushing a couple of gravy droplets off his trousers, he stood up, pushing the chair back onto the table. I don't think I ever caught your name. Fred says he entered the room again, wiping his hands with a cloth. It's, Howard. Nice meeting you, Howard. Howard started for the door, expecting Fred to follow behind him, only for him to vanish and back into the kitchen from the corner of his eye. He halted, taking one last moment to fully absorb the room, knowing it would most likely be the last time he would ever see it. He opened the door into the hallway and made his way back to the front door. As he reached for the knob, he heard the pitter-patter of fast footsteps creaking through the dining room. He turned. Fred came around the corner, red-faced. He kept walking until he was uncomfortably close, fidgeting as he stood, staring with bulging white eyes. Howard retracted as far back as he could, his head tilted upward as it lay against the scratchy wooden surface of the front door. I would like to ask you something. Fred's voice left no imprint of the cool, calm, collected man Howard had conversed with moments ago. You said you might come back here one day, did you not, when you were old and retired? Yes, yes, I did. If someone you love wanted something, Fred said, not Fred said, not missing the beat, something more than anything else in the entire world, and you had the opportunity to give it to them, you would do it, would you not? You would take that opportunity? Panic forced Howard to blurt out the first thing he could think of. I would, I would, I would, I would, I would. He repeated it over and over, quieter each time, so it didn't sound like a sentence anymore. Fred let out a deep sigh and backed away, running his hand across his scalp. Then you would understand, he whispered, grinning. He chuckled, a squeaky, unnatural chuckle, sitting down as he reached the base of the stairs. Goodbye, Howard. I wish you well. Good things are coming your way. Howard peeled open the front door. Fred waved as it closed behind him, still grinning. His heart was pounding. He stood outside the front door for what felt like hours, until he heard Fred's footsteps recede upstairs. Cautiously, he backed away from the house, half expecting to catch a glimpse of Fred's ghostly figure through one of the second-story windows. No such apparition to be seen, however, and Howard's racing mind calmed and began to walk home. Opened his front door, he almost jumped out of his skin as the phone rang. It was a writing agency he'd applied to. He got the job and they wanted him to start as soon as possible. They apologized for calling so late, but Howard didn't care. He thanked the woman there and hung up, promptly falling asleep on the sofa. When he awoke, he started packing his things, too excited to reflect much on the previous night's dinner. Leaving so soon, a local called out from across the street as Howard left the house. I hope the antics of you know who have put you off our town. Howard crowd reassured the man went on his way and formed a new profession. Nobody knew of his visitation at the mansion. He was intent on keeping it that way. The last he saw of the town was the well-kept graveyard in his rearview mirror as he pulled out into the country roads. For a mere moment, he thought he could see Fred leaning over a gravestone, watching and waving him goodbye with that maddening grin still spread out across his face. What the fuck? Huh. So, yeah, this is really well written. I'm liking this a lot. I wouldn't say I'm creeped out or anything, but eh. Howard clutched the walking stick in his hand tightly as he stood at the entrance to St. Anthony's. From a simple glance down the main road, he could tell any remainder of human life had vanished years ago. Oh, so that was a flash? Okay. The houses were faded and empty, some half collapsed, others with caved-in roofs. That's not how you spell that. And missing walls. The grass and the trees were sullen and gray, wilted and dying. The house he'd rented for his stay had brittle plywood nailed into it in the window frames, the front door sealed off. It was a far different atmosphere to the one he remembered from all those years ago. As he walked through the forgotten town, he remembered the last piece of news he'd heard relate into its existence, the evacuation. All had chosen to leave apart from one stubborn individual who barricaded themselves inside their mansion. Fred was never heard of him again after the town was abandoned. Some said he never left. And then, as he turned the corner past the rotten willow trees to face the front of the mansion, Howard saw why. The building itself had crumbled inward and sunk into the ground. It looked a mere few years away from being swallowed completely. Far, far more noticeable, of course, was the enormous mass of really the same. It's flora, not fauna, you fucking retard. Engulfing the house, intertwined with the brickwork, erupting from the floors and walls. Several stories high, it swayed peacefully with the wind like the chest of an animal rising and falling with each breath. A rainbow of flowers was cast across the heap of green like a kaleidoscope, shimmering, shimmering and twinkling in the sunlight. Howard swallowed, unsure of how to feel. He glanced around, wondering if Fred was still lurking somewhere in the distance, but saw nothing. Slowly, he carried on towards the graveyard, expecting to find a similar arrangement of flora. Instead, he found that each and every headstone had ripped from its place and cast aside into the street. The places in which they previously lay had been smoothed over with grass as if they never existed, and so the field was bare, save for the existence of a single isolated grave right in its center. The grave was ancient, perhaps one of the oldest ones of them all, its original shape having diminished significantly. Howard recognized its worn texture, kneeling by its inscription wiping away the dirt. Here lies Jessica Hazelton, loving wife, mother of one, and dearly missed by all who loved her. I was once lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. A healthy covering of poppies and daffodils had emerged from the headstone, and a piece of paper was tucked into the soil beside them. Howard picked up the paper and unfolded it, slipping on his reading glasses. I knew you'd understand, it read, written in Fred's handwriting. Oh boy, that was something. I'm gonna pause this now and gather my thoughts. Okay, so it's been about 30 minutes now, and I've thought about it and written down some stuff about it. So I guess here we go. Overall, I must say that I very much enjoyed this story. I feel that the pacing was appropriate, the scene transitions were clean, and overall the prose is very good. The descriptive language combined with the distinct personalities of the characters, even the ones of little importance, Makes you feel like you're peering out into an image of the world rather than the words on the page. Some of the things I like the most. The details of a New Age religious movement dedicate the preservation of mysterious growths. The mention of growths being found in places that humans should not have been inhabiting or where humans are known and not known to have inhabited. The subtle details, description of subtle details, such as the meal shared with Fred, as well as the odor of the mansion and the soiled spade, really work together to build a sense of something not being quite right with Fred. There's so many small details packed into the story, and just the perfect amount of unanswered questions to go along with them. This essentially begs the reader to develop conclusions and theories as to what is going on as they read the story, which makes each new scene feel fresh and out of the overall work extremely engaging. It also allows for different conclusions to be reached depending on how the reader chooses to process details as they read, while almost prompting them to go back and reread certain sections again. Praise aside, I have one, actually, extremely two, actually, two extremely, extreme, actually, two very minor issues. Whatever. Praise aside, I have one major, actually, extremely two very minor issues with the story. Radon is not mined. It's produced through the decay of uranium when it is exposed to water and air. It is, however, consistently found at sites where uranium has and is mined, and at these sites, it is a great concern. The other issue is that I can't exactly put a finger on the period in which it is set because there are mentions of the main character being in a motor coach. Well, later on, Febreze is directly mentioned. Overall, excellent writing, 10 out of 10. So yeah, I honestly really like this. I don't think it really deserves Pasta of the Month, to be completely honest, but it is good. So thanks for watching.